welcome to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 260 with Tommy Joyner. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer and guide, Derek Loudermilk. You can head to derekloudermilk.com to check out the show notes for this and all the previous episodes and future episodes. And before we get started, I'd like to plug my own coaching offerings. And if you are a thought leader or a digital nomad, or that's something that you want to be, then maybe we should talk. And especially if you're trying to create a brand new business model, or you're trying to mix a bunch of different business models, and maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you've heard a bunch of different great ideas, and you're trying to figure out exactly how you can use your specific knowledge and goals and expertise to create a business that's going to give you more freedom, that's going to let you live as a digital nomad. That's the type of tricky things where there's no clear path. That's what I really love helping entrepreneurs with. So if that sounds like you, then let's talk. You can set up a free strategy session with me. You can go to derekloudermilk.com/coaching, and you can read about my coaching and sign up for a session with me. All right, on to today's guest, Tommy Joyner. He is one of the co-founders of ContentPros, and that's a 7-figure business. And you'll learn more about that. It's a writing service, productized service business. And Tommy was introduced to me by Danny Flood, who has been a guest on The Art of Adventure. And I did a little bit of research about Tommy, and I saw that he had appeared as a podcast guest on Teo Roxon's podcast, who's Teo has also been on this show. And so a lot of the stuff that Teo covered, I tried not to cover. And I noticed that Tommy had been philosophizing a lot on his Instagram page. So I took a cue out of that book, and I thought, okay, he's thinking deeply about a lot of these things. So what I did with this interview is I took a meta approach, and sort of we looked back at the development of Tommy's business and how each country that he lived in, because he moves and has lived in a lot of countries as he's grown this business, how each country has affected him personally and has affected his business, and how he has grown and changed along with his business. And sort of that brings us, through the last 7 years to the point of this interview. And then sort of what's next, how is Tommy evolving as a person and entrepreneur? So this is a kind of a unique show, and that we're digging more into psychology and reflections of someone who's become a very successful entrepreneur, partly because of his own personal evolution. So I think you're going to really enjoy this inside look into the mind of Tommy Joyner. So here he is. Tommy Joyner, welcome to the podcast.
Derek, what's up, brother? Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And this is so funny. You're maybe the 10th, 15th, 20th guests who I've interviewed while they're in Bali, and I'm not in Bali. And I always consider Bali to be kind of like my second home, but I'm not there as much as I'm there. So I love that. I love that you're there. And Bali, I think Bali shaped me a lot. And I know that you've been traveling perhaps even longer than I have. How many years have you been sort of this digital nomad thing?
Man, I've been living internationally for 7 years now.
7 years. Okay. Yeah. And I'm about 5, I guess. And so I'm curious, and you and I share that we like to move slowly. We're not the 100 countries in a year type of people. And as you move to a new place and sort of immerse yourself in a culture and a city, how does that impact the way that you think and live your life and run your business? Because I imagine it starts to subtly change your way of thinking?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's very subtle and we don't always notice the energy shift that takes place internally when we're impacted by a place. But upon reflection and looking back in hindsight, I think it's easier to see like how those places impacted us. And I think it's not necessarily the same for everyone. I think that can be kind of a subjective thing depending on like where you're at in life. But for example, like the first place that I went and lived abroad for a significant period of time was South Korea, where I taught English. And that was like that was like, I would say the first um, personally transformative spiritual awakening experience that I had. So when I think about Korea, I think about like my first baby level up in consciousness, we could call it. And then, I lived in I lived in Colombia for a number of years. I also lived in Sri Lanka for a long period of time, and I also lived in Barcelona for a long period of time. I've spent a significant amount of time in Thailand and Bali. So those are like my main hubs in terms of places that I've been for like, let's call it 5 months or more in each one of those spots. And yeah, it's like there's a lot to unpack there because I've lived in a few different places now for a long period of time, but certainly like every one of them has leaves its own like unique imprint on you. I can't remember who wrote this in a blog post, but I think it was like Taylor Pearson or something I was reading, and he said he wrote something like pretty profound about how every city has like a whisper. And I do think that's an interesting thing as well, but I think it's very personal.
So tell me a little bit more about that baby level up that you got in South Korea. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I got to Korea I was 26 years old when I left the country for the first time for good. So I did a lot of kind of like bouncing around and not necessarily wasting time, but not necessarily like launching off right after college. Just kind of like fell into some things. And then around 26, got my act together to the point where I was like, okay, I want to take my life a little bit more seriously. I want to do this international thing. And I want to go to Korea. So I ended up in Korea by myself, didn't know anyone. And I spent a lot of time by myself. So I read a lot. I watched a lot of documentaries. I got into meditation. I started to discover things on a deeper level through hanging out by myself a lot. And just that was like the first time in my life where I had like a profound realization of of the oneness of humankind, let's call it. Like it was the first time in my life that I ever felt like we are all kind of part of the same thing taking place. So there's a lot more to go in there. A lot more that I could go into there, but that's like basically the realization that I come to. Also, Korea just showed me a lot of love, and I was able to kind of like just redefine myself in a lot of ways. So that was what Korea was associated with for me.
And did it give you a quest, like a spiritual quest? Did that kickstart something that you were then seeking in other places?
I think that started a little earlier. Like I did bounce around the States a little bit before I left. So originally I left Colorado. I'm originally from Colorado. I left Colorado. I went to New York. I spent like 5 or 6 months in New York, and I ended up getting a job in Chicago after that for about a year before I left the States. When I originally left Colorado, I was 24 or 25. I think that's like really when my hero's journey started. I just kind of felt something bubbling up inside and had like this crazy feeling like if I don't go now, I never will, and I'm going to die with like a ton of regrets. So that was like kind of what started it. And yeah, I've been to a lot of different places now, and I won't say that I've moved from each of them just like in pursuit of chasing like a good feeling. I've spent a significant amount of time in each place that I've been, as I mentioned, and as we kind of talked about earlier, and every one of them has just been a different phase associated with like other things that I've experienced in life and different kind of levels that I feel I've gotten to. So none better or worse than the other, just like different phases.
And so I know South Korea is a common place for people to teach English. With these other places, Colombia or Sri Lanka, how did you decide to go there versus anywhere else?
Well, ironically enough, like it's only been recently in my life where I've started to realize that we can draw straighter lines to the things that we want and pursue them a lot more, achieve them a lot more quickly if we take that route. But the whole reason I went to South Korea in the first place is because I wanted to save money, and I knew I could save some money there before ending up going back to Latin America. My whole goal was like I wanted to speak Spanish and I wanted to live in Latin America before I even went to Korea. So I went to Korea with the intention of saving up money and then going to Colombia with like a little bit of bankroll to be able to study Spanish and not have to work. So I ended up back there doing that for that reason. So that was the story for Colombia.
And so you're saying that you could have just gone straight to Colombia?
Yeah, like probably, right? Like I wanted to become fluent in Spanish and live in Latin America. And I didn't have any money at the time. Like when I left Chicago, like I had just gotten out of debt and like I had kind of like gotten back to even. I had like, $2,000 or $3,000 saved up to my name. So I knew that I needed like a year's worth of savings to go to Latin America and kind of like pad that. But I'm fairly certain that I could have made it work anyway. I'm not at all upset that I went to Korea though, because that ended up changing me, and I fell in love with Asia in ways that I never could have imagined. So, I guess it all kind of works itself out for a reason. But yeah, like, but as I've gotten older, I have realized that like certain goals that we have, like, there's a lot of fear associated with like the big dreams that we have, and us thinking that we have to lay out a bunch of different steps rather than just kind of like, trying to manifest that right away. And that's something that I've been doing a lot more of lately, and I've realized that bigger things can happen a lot more quickly than we originally may have thought.
Is there a particular example that led you to realize that you saw or did?
Yeah. Yeah, there are a few. Like in particular, like I got out of a relationship last July when I left Colombia. And I transitioned from like a lot of different relationships, romantically and otherwise. And I think just being like very intentional about the type of people that I wanted to attract in my life afterwards, started to become something that I realized towards the end of last year that can happen really quickly. So that's one for sure. Just like thinking and being intentional about the type of people I'm connecting, and then all of a sudden being connected to the right person at the right time is really cool. And then, yeah, like some stuff that's happened with business recently in terms of, deals that we've sold or stuff that we're trying to do moving forward, rather than taking a long road approach, kind of laying out like this 12-month plan. I mean, I think there's just oftentimes stuff that can happen in 30 days that we thought may have taken a year.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I feel like there's more to explore there because we have all these assumptions about what's possible or not. These also sort of scripts for our own life, like what we expect. And it can take an example or exposure to something to make us believe that even more is possible.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Is there more that you'd like to say there? I'm not sure the exact question I want to ask.
Yeah, no, I think we've already dove into a lot, and there's a lot to unpack with a lot of these different subjects. But with that one in particular, so for example, like one of the things that I talk to a couple of people that are close to me in business and some friendships that I have had in Medellin, for example, like I wanted to come back to Asia last year. Like I knew that I wanted to like go to Barcelona and come to Asia and like do a couple different things. And I knew that like I needed to transition out of like the romantic relationship that I was in. And like when I would talk to certain friends, it would seem like the process of me undoing, the process of me breaking up with my girlfriend, starting life in a new country, like seemed very daunting to some people. And to me, it was just like, no, I can make all these changes like immediately. Like I don't have to like wait. I could just like move. I could do all this. I could I could get a new girlfriend if I want to. I could get a new group of friends. Like I could just do that right now. And I did that. And like I've cultivated and like manifested this whole new reality like really, really quickly. And I do have some experience doing that in the past, but I think that's a huge thing, right? That's like as specific as I could be
Yeah.
with the current example, but like that would be a good example of like something that I did a better job drawing a straight line to, rather than I think a lot of us get stuck in the idea that we need to suffer for a long period of time and go through like all these challenges or get our business to like X level, or like just kind of like trudge through like the shitty things that are going on in our relationship in order to like get to some place where like we're eventually going to feel better. And like if you don't like create the emotion that you want to feel eventually right now, then like you're not ever going to feel it. So like I just started practicing feeling like I wanted to feel, and then like all of a sudden the situations happened that made me feel that way.
And can you name that feeling that you were after?
Yeah, I mean, like joy. ultimately ultimately just joy, like waking up with like a happier disposition and feeling more grounded. Like for like a period of time in my life while I was living in Colombia before I made that move last year, I felt some real like uneasiness in like the lower part of my abdomen, which is generally associated with like our root chakra, which has to do with like things like stability and structure in our lives. And I wanted to fix that. And I knew that like I needed to make some moves to actually do that. So when I made those moves, I was able to like kind of heal that and then move on from there.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's I'm sure really valuable for people. Colombia was that's where you started your business. Is that correct?
Yeah, Colombia is where I figured out how to make a dollar on the internet.
Okay, so I'd love to hear sort of the origin story of ContentPros. Yeah, just the how you made your first dollar.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I owe a lot of that to my current business partner, who I'm extremely grateful for. When I first got to Colombia, was actually I was actually getting a master's degree in international business at Universidad AOA in Medellin. And the reason that I was doing that is just because it was cheap. I wanted to have like people to interact with when I first got there. And that was like my transition after South Korea. And like I said, I had some money saved up. So I wanted to go there with like a bit of a purpose. But in the back of my mind, I also wanted to figure out how to start a business. So I had a buddy that I actually grew up with who was in Medellin at the same time. He had just come up from Chile after doing like a startup boot camp thing there. And neither one of us had anything going on, but we desperately wanted to figure out how to make money online. Ever since we read the 4-Hour Work Week a couple years prior, like everyone else, we wanted to live that. So we both had the same dream, and like we met each other every day in the cafe. It's pretty cool. Like we're both really disciplined people, and I really appreciate about both of us, because like our work ethic has ultimately, paid off with what we've created in Content Pros. But anyway, long story short, we were in a cafe. We were working on a project trying to sell some ebooks for like $15 or something. And we were hiring graphic designers off of Elance at the time. And for the listeners, Elance and Odesk used to be freelance platforms that have now merged and become Upwork, where you can set up a profile and deliver work as a graphic designer, writer, pretty much anything these days. And then someone can contract you out and you can negotiate a rate or whatever. So anyway, we were hiring graphic designers off of one of those sites. And my current business partner got the bright idea to set up a profile as a freelancer. And when he did that, I was kind of confused because he doesn't have any like direct skills of writing or graphic design or website development or anything really. He could sell.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of confused as to like what he was doing. But it turned out to be pretty brilliant, because he got a job doing some email autoresponder copy for a pretty substantial figure in the personal development world, and negotiated a contract for $5,000. And he negotiated that without having like a writer or a designer to do some of the web development work, anything, and was just like kind of like, we'll figure it out. Like I'll figure it out. And he kind of asked me to help him on that project because it was a bit daunting for both of us. But yeah, all of a sudden we had a project, and now we're kind of running a marketing agency, not knowing what we're doing, but we're like, okay, now we need to hire a writer, we need to hire a web designer, and all of a sudden we're outsourcing work and selling jobs and figuring out what people need and then just playing matchmaker.
So it's really interesting. So you went out and sold something first that you didn't really have, and then you figured out how to deliver on what you had just sold.
Yeah, it was more successful than Fire Festival, but similar philosophy.
Gosh, everybody's talking about that. I think I need to watch that documentary. And so did you think I'm going to try to do this myself, or did you know right away you were going to be hiring this stuff out? What was your thought process?
Oh, we knew right away we were going to be hiring it out because we didn't want to spend the time like doing the actual writing, right? Like we're a bit more entrepreneurial than most freelancers in that respect. So in a way, it turned out to be a blessing because we were able to skip a step. Like we were never fulfilling the work. So we knew we had to find people better than us to do it. So that was something we knew from the get-go.
And what gave you the confidence, the balls, whatever, to be able to sell a thing that you didn't know for certain you could deliver on?
Honestly, man, it was the fact that there were like no other options. Like it was figure out how to make money or like go back to the States after having been abroad for 2 years with my tail between my legs and just say like, okay, cool, that was a good run. Now I'll get a corporate job again and like maybe try and like make another launch. It was just like, I'm going to sit here in this cafe in Colombia until we figure out how to do this. And that was just the thing that we figured out that made money. And like there were other things that we wanted to do that we were definitely more passionate about, but that was the thing that we figured out how to make a dollar with. So that was the evolution.
Interesting. And so you were coming from a place of I don't want to have to go back to the US because I won't like it sounds like it would feel like a failure if you had to go back. What was going on there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think it has to do more with the fact that I relied on my parents and kind of family connections a lot growing up. I wasn't necessarily like made to do a lot of things on my own until I made myself do them at like the age of 24 or 25 when I left home. So I kind of knew like what I would fall back into. So my situation was like, very personal based on like what my life was like. But I knew that it would be easy for me to go home and just get a job and kind of fall into like the same pattern that I was in before. And ultimately just not really be super satisfied. And I wanted to figure out how to have more independence. I didn't feel like my own person yet. And like becoming an entrepreneur and successful on my own was like my stake in the ground of like trying to, establish like a little bit more of a new identity.
Yeah, it's funny what things that we're trying to avoid or trying to achieve and how they motivate us to get our act together and do something like finally make some money or move to a new place. I'm curious about so back to the like immersing in the Colombian culture. How did that affect the early days of the business?
So when I first got to Colombia, like we didn't start. So let's see, I got to Colombia in like September or October of 2013. And then we officially made like that first deal like at the end of March in 2014. So I was in Colombia for 5 or 6 months before I figured out any of that. So for the first 2 months, like I was just studying Spanish intensely and going to a language school in Cartagena and living with a family. And then I made my move to Medellin after that. So like my intention was to become fluent in Spanish before all this stuff started cluttering my mind, because I knew that I wasn't going to be like, once you start to try and figure out like how to start your own business, like that's where your energy needs to be in order to make it successful. It's really hard to balance that with like taking Spanish classes and dancing salsa and stuff. Like eventually you can do that, but at first it's like you gotta get some traction. So it was super cool. Like I like really dove into Colombian culture. At first I really enjoyed it, but in a way it became less important to me than like Korean culture, for example, because I was more focused on business. Eventually, I ended up dating a Colombian girl for almost 4 years, and I met her probably like April of that following year, and then was back in Medellin for a long time. So like so by default, I was in Colombian culture and interacting with her family and everything, and it was awesome. So now I'm completely fluent in Spanish, and like I know Colombia very well. It definitely feels like another one of my homes.
Mm-hmm.
But the digital nomad community is also big. It's really big in Medellin. So there's a lot of people from a lot of different places all over the world. And I started to realize that although I do have some really good Colombian friends, the best friends that I've made in life, and that they're just people that I can relate to. So like they're people in this community. And like at first I felt kind of guilty about that. Like, oh, I'm only hanging out with foreigners and, speaking English all the time. But then once I was fluent in Spanish and I just realized I vibed with, the entrepreneurs, then I didn't feel bad about that anymore. These are my people, and that's just kind of what it is.
Yeah. And then as you got practice getting these contracts and then fulfilling on them, can you walk me through the sort of the growth process of your business?
Yeah. So like, I mean, we made a lot of money like quickly out of the gate. Like within like 45 days, we had made like $20,000. And that's going from zero to all of a sudden being like, whoa, like, we're making 85% margins splitting between my business partner and I. And like, we've made $20,000, like coming from nothing in 45 days on project-based work. Of course, we have to fulfill on that work, and some of the receivables didn't come in right away, but like a lot of that money did immediately. So it was life changing, but it was all project based work, right? So like we got used to selling like these big projects for pretty high dollar amounts. And I know that sounds crazy coming from two dudes that like literally had no experience, but like we learned how to hustle, and like we're both pretty good salespeople. And I would like to think that, we did a good job for a lot of people. Of course, looking back at the first things that you do, you're pretty embarrassed regardless of the work that you did. And I think you should be. Otherwise, you're probably not improving. But every single time, we delivered a project, it was the best that we could do at the time. And we definitely got referrals and, learned a lot about business. But we did that for about 2 years, and like it was good, but it was all project-based work, and it was all kind of scattered. It was like email marketing stuff. It was like sales funnels. It was like some consulting work. It was like nothing consistent. It was kind of like a random digital marketing agency that we were running.
Yeah.
And then eventually we both, we read things like built to sell, the E-Myth, automatic customer. So we knew like, we started listening to Tropical MBA. That was like, these were early days of the talk of like what a productized service even was, right? But like we kind of knew that would be like a cool direction to head, but we had no idea how to do it. And it was hard enough going from the transition to pretending like we were the freelancer interacting with the customer. Because at first we would actually pretend to the customer, like I would face the customer and they would think I was doing all the writing.
Uh-huh.
And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm confident enough to tell them I have like a team and like the team's doing the writing. And then it's like, okay, I'm confident enough to hire a project manager and then have them talk to the customer after I sell the project and then not even interact with them. And then, it's like these levels. And one of the other levels associated with that was like, okay, now there's another level, like going from project-based work to trying to figure out how to like build an actual asset in a business. So anyway, I'm blabbering on here, but long story short, like we needed to figure out a recurring revenue model, right? So we knew that people would maybe we tried a couple different things. We tried like a consulting package that people would pay monthly for. We tried an email package that people would pay monthly for, had mild success with both of those things. And then eventually we realized that people need blog posts every month. If they're doing blogs consistently and they have like a content marketing team or arm of their business, like that's actually a thing that they need on a regular basis. So they will pay monthly for it. So that's ultimately what we created. So we've got monthly content subscriptions right now that we sell with our service that people pay us either monthly, annually, or quarterly for. And that's been the current iteration of the business for the past 3 years, and it's worked out extraordinarily well.
Cool. So, okay, a couple questions. Can you Can you name a couple other examples of productized services just so we can sort of define that for the listener?
Yeah, so one of the best examples that I can think of is Design Pickle. They're an unlimited graphic design service where you can just order, you can pay a monthly flat fee. It's like $370, I think. And you can just go into their platform and basically order as many graphic designs as you want as they can process on the back end. So product as service is basically like, it's a service that you would need. It's a bit of like, graphic design, right? That's nothing like special. So like they can be kind of like commodities, like a graphic design. Everyone needs graphic design, and they just sell it like on a monthly subscription service rather than being like a boutique graphic design agency where they'll do like all sorts of different things and like kind of put together like big tailored one-off projects for you.
Yeah.
It's just like a subscription. It's usually a subscription model that's packaged up like a digital cereal box of whatever you're selling.
Cool. Yeah, and that subscription, the recurring, there's so many things like that are going to subscription. You got your razor subscription, and my wife gets makeup subscription, and it's a great model because you can sort of predict what your revenue will be month to month because you'll gain or lose X amount of customers, and so it's nice because then you have a budget and you can sort of go from there. So yeah, that's wonderful. How do you find the people that are actually doing the writing? Is it hard to find good writers?
It was. We've been recruiting writers for as long as we've been in business, right? So like writers were the first people we hired when we were even doing project-based work way back in the day. So over the course of the past 5 years, I would say easily we've been in touch with or like come across or worked with in some way like over 1,000 writers, probably 1,500 or 1,600 writers that we've either like interviewed, thought about working with, worked with, hired and fired, or whatever. So we've basically curated a group of writers over a long period of time. Previous like 2 years, we really recruited heavily, and our writing team is such that now like our bench is so deep with the information that we have collected on writers, and we have them all categorized, and we've worked with a ton of them. So we know everybody's industry specialties and stuff. But yeah, that's probably one of the biggest assets of our business, to be honest with you. Like that alone is worth a ton of money, but it took a lot of work. So like I did a lot of the hiring and the finding of writers myself at first. And then one of the best hires that we ever made was our editor-in-chief, and she has since moved on to just be our editor-in-chief right now because we've already done a really good job of building the writing team. Mm-hmm. But before she was our hiring manager as well. So she and I kind of worked in tandem to do that. But honestly, like she crushed it. I hired someone that's like way smarter than me and a better editor, and she just built like an amazing team.
Gosh, good hires are so wonderful, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
When someone over delivers or does something really amazing, it's beautiful. So take me through at this point what you're doing on the business, like a typical workday on the business. What types of things are you doing?
Well, I handle our finances basically. So like I have a financial guy that helps me out too, like keep things organized. But like I do like higher level financial analysis for the business. So I'll make sure that, like our numbers look okay. I'll kind of like look at our subscriptions for part of the day and just see if anyone's canceled or see if payments went through. I have other people helping me out with that as well. But I always kind of like to look at the numbers just to feel like I have a beat of the business. But other than that, man, like not much. My business partner and I have a meeting once per week with the team. And then on that meeting, the team gathers notes and tells us like any problems that are going on or like big updates that they can't handle on their own. And then I have a meeting once a week with my business partner as well, just to talk about like higher level moves and things that we're thinking about doing with the business. Prior to that, like both of us were really focused on sales and marketing, but the business basically gets as many customers as it loses through referrals right now every month. So it's like maintained like a good equilibrium. So like we've just kind of let it chill like at the level of revenue that it's at. So my day to day with the business is like is uh is not much, if I'm being honest. I just kind of interact with the team, make sure they're doing all right, and like yeah, and then I kind of hit up our two main employees, and I just encourage them.
It's very inspiring to me. Hopefully it's inspiring to the listener that you've created such a great team and systems and all this stuff, over many years. But it's kind of remarkable, right? That you don't have to be there babysitting everyone and doing all this stuff. It's really works.
Yeah, man, and I feel so much of it like I always feel like things could have happened faster than they end up happening, and maybe that's not necessarily true, but looking back, I do realize like how much as entrepreneurs we just get in our own way because we think things have to be done a certain way, or we're holding on really tightly to try and make sure that things like don't break. And one of the things that I've really learned is like the more that I've let go, the more things that I've assumed, like I really try to analyze like what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So for example, up until a couple weeks ago, I was like really going through our expenses and like doing some things on our financials that took me a lot of time every week because I was just kind of paranoid, and I'm like very detail oriented when it comes to like our finances.
Mm-hmm.
And I just stopped doing like what I was doing to see if anything would break, and like nothing did. So I applied that philosophy to a couple other things that we were doing with the team, and just kind of let them handle more things. And eventually, you realize that some of the stuff you thought was maybe really important to the operations of the business really wasn't. And then if it was really important, the thing like light gets shut on that pretty quickly, and then you can figure out a solution for it. Like it's never the end of the world. It's just like, oh, cool, we need to adjust that, and then you do.
Wow. Yeah. And so learning to let go of these things. I'm curious if there's been any like major decision points that you've made in the business, perhaps as it was growing, that given what you know now, you would make differently?
As it relates to, man, that's hard to say because, everything happens like so organically.
Right.
But I would have, like, we always, like, we're always trying to get better, right? Like, we're always trying to make the business better. I just analyzed our financials for the previous 18 months, and the amount of money that we wasted on like projects, like sales and marketing flops or whatever. We're still a profitable company, but the amount of money that we kind of like wasted on experiments that weren't maybe as well thought out as they could have been is certainly a regret, because it's like, wow, we could have like pocketed that money. So I think like, if anything, it's like, it's learning to appreciate what you've created and like taking a step back and like reflecting on that, be like, cool, this is a machine that's working, like, rather than try and constantly iterate. Like if you're always trying to make things better, sometimes I think you have a tendency to basically like prematurely iterate upon things without them like having the ability to like mature and see like what's up there. Like if you are changing something in your business and you don't let it sit for like 90 days to see like what's going on there, then I think you're changing again too fast. And we've just, for better or worse, like, I like my business partner and I are like really like believe in constant improvement. We're like big self-development guys. So like, that's kind of like the nature of the beast, but yeah, maybe just changing things too quickly, which maybe resulted in some inefficient spending.
Yeah, I can totally relate. And it's, for me, it's like tempting to want to throw money at a thing just because it's annoying or a headache. Is that where it was coming from for you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah. I mean, sales and marketing is a big one, right? Like that's like lead gen and stuff is like, we threw a lot of money at that, but also, yeah, like at one point we had 8 full-time employees. Now we have 2. So like the level of inefficiency, especially at that point in time, was like unspeakable, right? Like that's insane. 8 employees, it was horrible. We built like a company that I never wanted. And thankfully we got back away from that model. But we kept on just trying to hire people to like, to fix, just to kind of like get out of things. But it turned out that, that was just even more inefficient. So that would be another example for sure.
I want to ask you about, so being an entrepreneur, of course, is a roller coaster. How do you deal with bad days when things are frustrating or it's just not working? Because the easy days, like when everything flows and people always say yes to you, you're like, I'm a genius. How do you approach days when things are not flowing that well?
Yeah, that sucks sometimes. I've gotten better at I've gotten better at maintaining like a similar state of being, like when things are really good and when things are really bad. Like, of course, I'm always trying to be happy and I'm trying to approach things like positively, but like I'm a pretty realistic optimist, but I do like to maintain like a positive disposition. So like when things are bad, I just try to put it in perspective, and now it's easier for me to do that because like I've experienced a lot of the bad, and like none of it has like killed me or like crippled me or brought me to my knees. Like I've survived through all of it, right? So I think like if you experience enough of it, you get to the point where you're like, okay, I mean, whatever, this is a shitty thing that happened, but like let's look back at all the other shitty things that have happened, and did that ruin the business? No. Did we lose all our customers the next day? No, that's not going to happen. You just go through like, I kind of go through like a mental checklist, and then like I find solace in knowing that most of my fears are unfounded when I am going through a bad day or when those things happen. Because when you're going through a bad day, right, the reason you feel bad is not necessarily because this bad thing happened and you're dwelling on that. It's usually because this bad thing happened and you're worried about like what other bad things could happen as a result of that, or like how your business could like implode further than it already has or whatever.
Yeah. I think for people that are listening that are working on businesses or trying to start something, what you're speaking about is that you have this array of experience and hindsight to look back at all these things. And so the first time you experience a freak out, you kind of have to experience it fully because you don't have that background to draw from necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will, and you'll be super paranoid about things that don't matter for a long time until you like gain that perspective. I had a mentor tell me one time that like you've leveled up in business when like complaints from your customers don't make you lose sleep at night, and like and that you like don't care, basically. Not saying that like you don't care about your customers, but basically it was like, yeah, like when like the real shitty things in business start happening in terms of like your customers or your clients like being really upset about something for a minute or whatever, like you've leveled up in business when like those things just they don't make you lose sleep at night. And I thought that was pretty profound.
And is that because you're not taking them personally anymore?
Yeah, I think it's like you're not taking them personally, and also like I think it has to do more than anything with like getting to the point where you're not approaching things in a reactive state of mind, right? Because usually when you freak out about that stuff, it's because you give into your emotions fully, and like you let your feelings consume you, and then you identify as like the anxiety or whatever you're feeling, rather than like observing it and being like, oh, cool, yeah, that's there, and then really understanding like the situation and processing it correctly.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if there are certain aspects of this business that you really love to spend your time thinking about, like the things that bring you the most joy in your business, that you really nerd out about, learning the minutia of, XYZ.
Yeah, man, I'm kind of like a business finance nerd, actually. So like I really like tidying up our books and just making sure that like I can analyze like our customer data appropriately. So like I'm really into that. That part is like very fascinating to me. When you've got enough recurring revenue for enough of a period of time, like you kind of have to earn the right to even like analyze your books, to be honest with you, because like you have to make money and not like have data to look at. So like it was only to the last couple years where I had enough recurring revenue happening every month to look back at our track record and be like, oh, cool, like this is crazy. Look what happened in this month, whatever. So that was really cool to me. And then I love interacting with our team. Like I love motivating people. Like I love talking to like a higher level contractors, our full-time contractors, employees, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, stuff like that. I used to love talking to customers. I still love interacting with them, but I'm trying to figure out like how to kind of restructure some of those relationships, because I want to be even less a face of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Wow. Tommy, this has been really great stuff. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important to share with our listeners?
Man, we really dove into some deep stuff quickly, and then went into the biz stuff, which I hope was and is helpful for the listeners. I think a lot of it I think is, I've shared a lot of this stuff with other business owners that have been able to do some pretty cool things in the world of productized service and otherwise. Yeah, I can't really think of anything necessarily, that we haven't touched on in terms of like any tactics. I would just say that, it's a journey, man. Like I've been out here for like 7 years. I started, teaching English and then figured out how to kind of do some stuff online, and just like the longer that you stick with it, the better it gets. I'll say that. Like it just continues to get better.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. So let's see. A final question for you is, how are you thinking about your legacy and the impact you leave now 7 years into the journey?
I'm thinking a lot more about that, because the reason that I got into doing what I'm doing like was strictly based on figuring out my why was bigger than money. My why was freedom, right? Like it was the freedom to live anywhere I want, like on my own terms, and be out here. But I think depending on like the background that you have and where you come from in life, Seth Godin has a quote about like people with privilege having a duty to, do great things and make impact in the world. So like I see it as my duty to help a lot more people and serve in ways that are much greater than I already have with my business moving forward. So yeah, it's been really cool. I've experienced a lot of cool things, but like now it's definitely time to give back. So I'm 33 years old now, and I've got other big goals in life that I want to accomplish that aren't associated with kind of like some of the things that I thought about as a younger digital nomad that involve helping a lot of people, for sure. So that's like the core of it.
Cool. That's great to hear. And I'm excited to see what that ends up looking like, because of your great track record with the things you've done so far. I expect whatever this ends up looking like is also really awesome. So Tommy, thanks so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Instagram's probably the best place. Tommy_Joiner. I've got a lot going on there. I post pretty regularly. That's a really good place to follow me, and just in terms of kind of like what my journey is like, and that'll continue to evolve as well. I've connected with some really cool people through that. So yeah, Tommy_Joiner at Instagram. And then if you want to check out ContentPros, which is the current company that I run, it's ContentPros.io. You can check us out there.
Wonderful. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm really glad that we connected, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
Cool, man. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye. All right. Another fun episode with Tommy. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a message on Instagram. We're both active on Instagram. Or if you like and you want to help out the show, you can always leave an iTunes review. That really helps keep the show up in the rankings, so other people who want to learn about this stuff can find out about it. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you are working on becoming an entrepreneur, a digital nomad, or a thought leader, and you want to talk strategy with me, I'm offering you as a listener of the show the chance to hop on the phone for a half-hour free strategy session with me. You can set that up. You can apply for that through my coaching page on derekloudermilk.com. And I'll send you some questions beforehand, and then we'll set up a time to get up on that phone if it makes sense. And yeah, maybe I can help you. Combining the knowledge of 260 Art of Adventure podcast episodes. All right, that is a wrap for today's episode. So now it's your turn to go out there and live adventurously.